Good morning, Sister Ann Patrice Remkus.
Good morning, Sister Jody Screes.
It's wonderful to be here with you and once again to hear the story somewhat of your life. We might have to have session 2, session 3, but I'd like to start out by saying that your room in Regina was wired.
It was, and the one in Maria is even more wired.
Oh, is it? Well,
many.
tell us why that you had a wired room.
Well, as Dr. Keatson said, you're a bionic woman now.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Anyway, I have a pacemaker, and it has to be, the monitor has to be plugged into analog wiring, and that's all I know.
Not digital, but
Not digital. I just learned that.
the analog.
Analog,
Yes.
right. Yes.
And so now you peacefully sleep and live in Maria, correct?
I do. And it's very nice. People have been just beautifully supportive. I mean, it was very nice in Regina, too, and I knew my way around, so I didn't bump too many things. But when I started to fall rather frequently, Sister Mary Jane thought that I'd be safer over here. Well, so far I only fell once here.
Oh, on the hard floor yet.
Well, it was on the bathroom floor, and it's not carpeted.
I know.
So,
And the major reason for that is your eyesight, correct?
well, part of it is that because I don't have any spatial vision, but part of it is that my balance is not good. And so I am doing the wellness program in PT.
Wonderful.
Gladys was funny. She said, Dr. Keatson put on here indefinitely. I said, I didn't know that, but maybe after I have my green burial, I'm going to be moving my legs up and down. Who knows?
Is the eye disease, I would call it, is that hereditary?
You know, we all had some eye problems, but I don't remember that anyone's
Seriously.
doctor said it was wet macular, which
What
is the
about your
bleeding
mother
kind.
and father?
I think my mother had macular, but it must have been dry. As Dr. Marcus explained, dry wears out slowly, and she died at 102. She could still
Ann.
see shapes, so I think hers must have
Well,
been dry.
watch out, world and wired room. Ann's going to be around for a while. Tell me about your father, if you will, please.
Well, both my mother and father were born in Lithuania, and they did not know one another. But at that time, it was one of the times, I should say, that Russia had control of Lithuania. It was given to Lithuania, pardon me, it was given to Russia again after the Second World War. But this was before that. My dad was almost 21, and he knew that if he stayed, he would be conscripted into the Russian army, and he didn't want that. And so he joined an underground group who walked by night from Lithuania to the Netherlands.
Well, wasn't there a Baltic Sea in between? I mean, it's
No.
Lithuania.
No, the Baltic Sea is, as you look at the map, to the left of Lithuania, and the Netherlands is
A little south.
across Europe.
Yes.
So, but when he got there, when you asked about the eye, when he got to the Netherlands, and they were supposed to board the vessel the next day, the doctor, I guess they had a quick physical because the doctor found an infection in his eye. And so he couldn't go. And the only thing he ever said about that, he was not angry, didn't express how helpless he had to feel because he knew Lithuanian and Polish and a little bit of German, but he didn't know Dutch. And so he had to feel lost. But all he said about that was, that doctor was very smart. He cured me in a week.
My.
So whether that had anything to do with this, I have no idea, but anyway.
And you're a Rockford girl, as we say in the convent
Oh,
here.
yes. Rockford. I had the St. Casimir Sisters for 8 grades.
Were there St. Casimir Sisters headquarters there?
Yes, they taught at the school. That was the only.
But I mean their mother house.
Their mother house is in Chicago on Marquette Road. And we had visited there, I think when we were in 8th grade.
I bet they were good teachers.
They were. They were very conscientious. They were all very young and had loads of energy. I mean, the sister who taught me in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, we were all in one room because our class was historically the smallest. There were only 5 of us in my class. Anyway, she was not only a teacher, but she was musician for the parish. She had the choir. She had children's choir, and she was sacristan. I don't know when she slept.
That sounds like some of our work in the church, doesn't it?
I guess it does. When we're young, we do,
Well, when
a
did
number
you
of things.
discover the Adrian Dominicans?
I went to Muldoon, and I fell in love with it immediately. I remember saying to my sister when I told her I was going to enter, I said, you know, I love every person there and every brick. And she just laughed at me.
That is lovely. One sister did you have? Or?
No, I had 3 sisters. They're all in heaven. I had one brother. He died very young. He was 52 of heart. And
So
my last sister, my oldest sister, lived until November of last year. So we used to say that in the 5 of us, I was the bottom. We were the bookends in the family.
And she must have been up in her...
She was 101 when she died.
Oh, my, like your mother.
Yes, please.
Yes. Is that your dream?
My dream is not to live that long, if it's okay with God.
But
I
your
do
mother
hope He finds me ready.
Your mother
before.
had her
She
mind
did.
active. That's important.
It was amazing because she was in a nursing home the last 4 years of her life. And she was bedridden, but I used to go in from Chicago every weekend, and I stopped at the nursing home and she was asleep. This was maybe 2 weeks before she died. And so I thought, well, I'll just sit here, maybe she'll wake up. No, she opened her eyes and I said, hello, Mom, how you doing? And she said, I'm so weak. She said, I'm too old, I'm 102, what do you think? That what do you think still
question.
tickles me. What do you think?
And who were some of the teachers at Muldoon that inspired you?
Well, the one who inspired me the most was Sister Cyril Edmund, and she continued to inspire me always.
What more can you say, right?
She really, you know, she had come from 25 years of teaching philosophy at Catholic University, and she never let on that, you know, this was downgrading or anything. She just was I found her very interested in the girls and wanting them to do their best, and you know, she didn't.
It must have been an adjustment for her, too.
I'm sure
coming
that it
from
was.
that environment, yeah.
Right, and yet, I think what absolutely sold me was there were 5 of us entering in 1946 in June. We didn't all stay, but anyway, there were 5 of us. And before the end of the year, our senior year, she invited our mothers and ourselves to come for a tea. Well, a tea.
In the convent.
Yes. And my mother said, I can't go. My mother did not learn English well. She did not work outside the home except a very short time. And so she didn't have occasion. You know, she and my father talked Lithuanian, and we understood Lithuanian at St. Peter and Paul School, we learned the grammar and so on. We even had spelling bees in Lithuanian.
Oh my!
But that was only occasionally, you know. I mean, predominantly it was teaching in English. But I said, Mom, we have to go. Well,
did she?
Yes.
Oh,
we're
God
on the
bless her.
bus. We got to the door of the convent, and Sister Cyril Edwin met us. And she took one look at my mother and embraced her. And I don't know whether she reminded her of her own mother or what, but it was so tender. I mean, it was like instant love affair. I'll never forget that. And that took the nervousness away from both of us. It was wonderful.
Who were some of the other teachers you had?
Sister David, who was my sponsor, and she was very witty. She taught science. And Sister Helen Raymond, our former Sister Helen Raymond, and I used to stay after and clean up the lab and laugh a lot. Sister Alicia, Sister Jane Marie.
Oh my!
Sister Rose Francis. No, yes, Rose Francis was there ahead of me. She wasn't there when I was there. Sister Grace Alma, who also left before I got there. She was quite a teacher of drama. Somebody told me she performed on Broadway. I don't know if that's true or not, but my sister was, Vicky, my closest sister, was 3 years ahead of me. And she was class president, and Sister Grace was moderator, I guess, of the senior classes. So, you know, Vicky would say she was pretty tough, but she said she taught me a lot. Well, I think I prayed her away before I got to Muldoon. Anyway, that wasn't very nice of me. But
who were some of? Are any of the women that entered when you did, of the 5? Did any of them stay? You said a few left.
Well, Sister Gloria Laro stayed until
of
she
happy
died.
memory.
Oh,
yes.
She was a woman who smiled and lit up a room.
Indeed.
And Sister Margaret James stayed for quite a long time. That was Eleanor Seekerman.
Yes.
And Sister Pat Conley stayed at least 25 years. And she was at St. Dominic's when it closed, and I don't know what all happened there. But
I think I remember hearing Sister Trina say that our former Margaret James helped her with, wasn't she an artist?
Yes.
Yes, helped
good
her
artist.
with the Springbank publication.
Could be. She was very talented, very creative, and
Of all
funny.
all the missions, and there are probably many, I would suspect at least 15 missions.
Probably. I think there were 15.
What one stands out in your heart?
Well, you know, I was thinking about that, and I guess the one that comes to mind most is Loretto in Douglas, Arizona. It was 10 minutes from the border.
Oh my!
And it was primarily Hispanic, and the children were really very pliable. I mean, for the most part, we had a few discipline problems, but very few. I think they wanted to learn, and I knew no Spanish. I was very young. I was in my 20s when I went there. All the sisters, there were 9 of us, all were older than I was. And
were you the principal?
It was a challenge, pardon?
Were you the principal?
Yes. You know how they used to say principal and
Happy
superior?
day.
Pardon?
Oh, happy day.
Oh, honestly, I said to one of the assistants, we served 3 parishes, and that could be confusing at times, but anyway, one of the assistants had gathered men, volunteers, to paint the school. We lived in the school. We lived on the top floor. And they were just finishing when our train came into Douglas. Anyway, Father welcomed me, and I said, I'm happy to be here, but I said, I don't know Spanish. He said, Sister, just let them know that you love them. And that was the wisest thing he could have said.
beautiful.
Without knowing it, that's what we did. And I think, you know, in fact, I have a little confirmation from a few of them that were adults, that are adults now.
That have remembered you.
Yes, and have said that, in particular, our Ruben Mendez, who was very bright and very creative, he wrote and said that at Loretto he never felt any distinction between the Anglos and the Hispanics. And he said that wasn't true when I got to Douglas High School. And I was sorry to hear that. And he said, nor at the University of Arizona. And at the time that he wrote, he was working at Stanford. So, you know, he had some smarts. But
did some of the students cross the border to come to school?
yes, we had 45 that would come across the border. Sometimes they'd forget their passports and have to come back at night and get them.
And knock on the door.
Yeah, right, ring the
and you
doorbell.
were in your nightcap.
And we were on third floor and come down to first. But they were really sweet kids.
How do you feel about the situation in the country today about the border?
I think it's tragic, absolutely tragic. When I think of the potential that is there and the eagerness to want to make their life and their family's life especially better than their own. There were several times in the 6 years that I was there that the government got kind of tight, and one of the priests would call and say, don't go over the border. You know, when we had company, which wasn't very often, but when we did, we usually took them over to Agua Prieta, and there were gift shops and so on, and but they'd say, don't go, it's too hot there now.
That was in the early 60s that you were in Douglas, correct?
Yes, the late 50s, the early 60s. I was there from 56 to 62.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there never was a huge blow-up, but the government was communistic. And the father of, in fact, he was a teacher. He was the father of one of our girls, and he told me that there was a price on his head because he would not teach, when he was teaching over there, he would not teach that they just left out all that the church did to help the people. I mean, certainly we have a lot to be ashamed of on how we imposed the faith, or tried to impose the religion, not the faith, the religion on the people. I'm talking about generally in Mexico. But that man was remarkable. He gave the history of the relationship of the two countries in one setting to me. I mean, it was, never looked at a note, could give dates and so on. It was, and his daughter was a good student too.
I remember in the not too distant past that you were, I believe, riding the megabus, and you met a young woman who eventually entered.
Yes.
And is no longer with us, but that's quite a story, Ann.
It was really remarkable. I said the Holy Spirit really took over, and all I can say is I didn't get in the way.
It was the megabus, though,
yes,
wasn't it?
It was
and
the megabus
Adela?
from Toledo to Chicago. And she's from Romania, and we simply were able to talk together easily. And when we got to Chicago, we exchanged email addresses, and she said, you know, I'm at Bowling Green. She was teaching at the time. May I come to visit? And I said, or maybe she called after and asked if she could come. Anyway, she did come several times. Twice she came with different young men, and so it was just a visit. You know, those were visits that we mutually enjoyed. And then she came for come and see. Well, first she said she wanted to become an associate. She said, will you mentor me? I said, yes, of course. And the next thing I knew, she was coming for Come and See. I think she came once for that, and then came another time when we had it, and she simply was present for something.
And then before you know it, she
left. I didn't hear anything from her.
Oh.
I mean, when she left.
Works at Berry now, or ministers at Berry.
Yes, she was doing that during her ministry part of formation. And I don't know if it's the same thing that she's doing down there, but this young man she married is, I presume he's young, was working at Berry also. So God has different ways of calling us, I guess.
Exactly. Well, she will never regret the experience that she had, especially knowing you. You are so friendly to everyone. And I remember even when you would go over to Madden, I think there wasn't a Weber guest that you didn't speak to. And that is a beautiful gift to have, especially at your age of 88 almost.
That's right.
You just have
ancient.
a few. Pardon me?
Ancient.
Ancient, yes, very, very ancient. What was your baptismal name, Ann?
Oh, do I have to say it?
You have to say it.
It was Lucille.
Lucille.
And I didn't care for it, probably because that commercial, you know, the Oldsmobile commercial was very popular.
But Lucille Ball.
Well, whatever. It didn't convince me that I liked it. But my family always called me Lou, and so did the girls at Muldoon, and a few of the boys I met.
The name Lillian come into your life?
Well, that came early on. I think my mother must have been tired. I was number 5. And I don't know why Lillian was on my birth certificate, and Lucille was on my baptismal certificate. We had to. My brother had some problems too, because he was the only boy, and I guess the doctor presumed his name would be Frank. That was my dad's name. So Frank was on his birth certificate, and he was baptized Edward. So we both had to get affidavits that that we were authentically one person each.
Identity crisis.
Yes, early on.
Yes. Well, your religious name was?
Ann Patrice, and it still is.
It still is. And Ann for your mother?
No, Ann was for my sister. And little did I know that I would be teaching in Rockford, and it was really odd when I would meet some either teacher or student. I was there for 8 years, and I'd introduce them as my sister Ann Cutoff. So your mother didn't have much imagination. You know, I mean, you know, to have
two Anns.
Two the same. But that was her name, and she was like a second mother. And she was 14 years older. And Patrice was really for my mother, whose name was Petronella, but she was called Pat all her life. And so my niece and I were both Patrice for her. So it had some meaning, you know, and I don't know. It's been Ann Patrice for a long time, and I hope it will be to the end.
Now, you said you were stationed in or missioned in Rockford. Is that because your mother was ill?
Right. I had been in Iowa and Arizona and California, and they were up in years by this time. So when then Mother Jean Marie was provincial, when we had visitation, I said, there must be schools on the other side of the mountain. I'd been out there 7 years, and they were really getting up in years. And so I went from O'Dowd to Aquinas, and, you know, I thought, I don't know how the girls are going to accept me, you know, the
Chicago,
new teachers.
Aquinas?
Yes. I had taught at St. Lawrence's up the street. I taught second grade very early on in life, in teaching life, and I had some of those same young women
at Aquinas.
At Aquinas in the junior class. Anyway, they were so welcoming. You know, last night I was having a hard time thinking, well, maybe I should say Aquinas as my favorite. It was the favorite high school that I taught in. They were not only friendly, but they were eager to learn. And the first day I walked in my homeroom, and the representative from that section came up to me and she said, "Sister, we met with the officers in the summer, and these are the things that we need to do, and we have to have a rep in these areas. So-and-so, I have one, so-and-so, I have one." About 5 different committees. She had somebody for everything. She says, "We have to get one more for..." I thought, well, if I had to sleep in some morning, I'd call Sue Zidek and ask her to please take over.
But you say that there were high school students that you had at St. Lawrence.
Right.
I bet they thought you were coming back to check up on them, see how well they had done.
I don't know what they thought, but Sister Jean Patricia and Marie had a niece in my class. She was absolutely delightful, very, very bright, but very serious as a young child.
Who was the principal at that time?
Sister Rose Francis was to begin with, and then Sister Mary Alice. I was there 4 years. Sister Mary Alice was there my last year, and Sister Mary Kathleen O'Neill followed Sister Mary Alice. I believe that was, I don't think there was an interruption.
Yes. So the highlight of your grade school experience would be Douglas.
Yes.
And high school experience, Aquinas.
Right.
Is there any other place? I mean, I can't imagine you crossing over California. You've been around the world, Anne.
I know.
Was it O'Dowd?
O'Dowd, and I was just there 1 year. I was stationed at Santa Cruz for 9 days. That was a very short mission. And I had been at O'Dowd in the summertime for, we had summer school there, and I was teaching. And so I came back to O'Dowd. Someone became ill, I guess. I can't remember exactly. All I know is that was my first time in high school, and at that time O'Dowd was very, very high standards in academics. They had a waiting list of both girls and boys, and they enrolled exactly the same number. They had coeducation.
Amazing.
They weren't mixed classes except in the upper grades. There were some. But socially, they were all one. But anyway, that was interesting.
I would love to ask you one last question. If you could pretend I'm not here, with whom would you want to be chatting? Someone you have known in your life, living or deceased, or even an imaginary character would be fine.
Well, she was not imaginary.
She was not imaginary.
My sister Vicky Victoria was just ahead. She was 3 years older than I was, and we shared everything. I used to say I could go to confession to her. She was very, very close to me. We even as late as like 12 years ago, she became very ill the last 5 years of her life. She died at 74 and had lymphoma, and she suffered terribly, but her life had been really in so many ways. She was creative, and she said, when early on in the illness, she said, "I can't die yet. I have so many things to do."
Oh, how beautiful!
But she was really.
Was she married?
Oh yes, yes, and they adopted one child. They tried to adopt 2, and there was a big mix-up. Jack had been asked to go to Brazil for 3 years after they had adopted Mary Beth, and. But I'd like to tell her that even though there were rough moments during the teen years, particularly Beth's teen years, She has become just a wonderful, loving person. I'd like to tell Vicki that she says and does things that remind me of her mother. So
beautiful.
I'd love to tell her that. She must know that.
She must. She must. Well, thank you, Ann. This has been delightful. And especially how you have inspired me through the years that I have known you, since '98 in Regina.
Well, that's very kind of you,
Yes.
Jody.
But I secretly observe you. I mean, not on purpose. I'm not taking notes.
I'm glad.
But I do see you reach out to the stranger. And that is such a gift to us in the congregation. And you certainly are the epitome of hospitality.
Well, thank you
So
very much.
thank you.
I don't know how to cook, however, not very well.